James, what would you say you see the main problem in the market is at present?
I mean, I think employee expectations have really increased over sort of even the past few months with the whole sort of lockdown and working from home. And I think, employees as a whole, they really expect a lot from the organization they work with. And therefore what that means is, that can be expectations through, the benefits they receive, and also what it certainly really plays into is the training. And they've got high expectations. They expect to have, that sort of cutting edge training, and to be offered the opportunity to improve as an individual, to advance their career and all those sorts of things. So, expectations on the employee side is definitely driving, I think, organizations to look at training slightly differently, particularly now with, an expectation of remote working, and people sort of having tried the remote working, as I call it, a sort of a forced experiment in that we've all had to do it.
Yeah.
But, majority of cases it's worked well, and people are thinking, okay, well, this is great. So, but how do I get trained when I'm remote working? How do those big, training courses run remotely? And so that's where technology is starting to come in, and organizations are thinking, okay, well, how do we keep our employees engaged when they aren't coming to the office so much, they aren't getting that level of interaction? And technology has got a big role to play in that, one of which being virtual reality.
Okay, and what would you say then is the impact of the problem? Obviously, with people now working from home a lot more, and it's kind of the way forward. What is the impact of this problem?
I think ultimately the impact is, people feeling less connected to the company they work for. And, if you're less connected, arguably, there's a loyalty is going to be less. And therefore, what you could do is end up with a far more transient workforce. And people sort of, a lot of people, they buy into a company, they buy into the ethos of the company, they buy into the atmosphere of the company, they buy into, the informal conversations they have whilst they're grabbing a coffee with the CEO. All those little things sort of build up to make, a company what it is. And when you take all that away, and people don't feel as connected, I think, there could be any number of kind of ramifications of it. And I believe the stage we're at the moment with remote working, is a little bit of the honeymoon period still, whereby it's still quite novel. The weather's still quite reasonable. There's sun outside, and I think it's still quite novel. I do wonder that as people move into winter, everything spends most of the time being dark and wet and grey, the wonderful weather we have in the UK. I think as we move into that, I think it could become more challenging. I think as people realise this isn't just a sort of, quite exciting, period of time, but it's actually something that's going to carry on. Okay, not full remote working, but less interaction in the office. I think that could throw up a whole number of new challenges. And I mean, I hope it doesn't, but I do think as people think, well, this is it, I'm going to be sat in my office for 80% of my working time interacting with people as we are now on Zoom or whatever video conferencing. I do wonder if mindsets will shift. And so I think the problem there is a less engaged employee base, and all the problems that could sort of be associated with that, of potentially less productivity, more moving around roles, so inconsistency, all those sorts of things. But we're in new territory, right? So
strange times.
I'm completely wrong, but I do worry that may start to come into play.
I think that's a fair thing, because you're right, it is that honeymoon period. I mean, even at the start of lockdown, like, I was working from home and it was great. I had my family home with me. It was all very new. But like you say, as the dark nights draw in as well, that affects motivation, doesn't it? Conditions outside, kids going back to school, the house not being as busy.
Yeah, and I think, all those things come into play. And I think, it's just when you start getting your head around this is, and I hate the phrase new normal. Let's just say that more sort of, the standard way to work moving forward. Yeah, I think we could see some. surprising outcomes from that.
Okay, well, what options would you say there are then to fix some of these kind of potential problems that you can see?
I mean, I get sort of frustrated when you hear people sort of say, you know, technology is the answer, kind of, it's almost like, what's the question? I mean, technology has a role to play within this, but it's not just that we can solve all the problems that are coming through by technology. There are some things where it has a really important role. There are other things where you still will just need to be doing sort of fairly normal ways of working. So I think overall, you know, there's going to be a shift. I think it needs to be pointed in the right direction, needs to be used for the right purpose. What we always say to people is, you know, don't fall in love with the technology itself, you know, sort of fall in love with what it can do, what it can achieve. So, you know, people need to take a pragmatic approach. You know, all these sort of, the amount of people I see on LinkedIn with the title futurist, you know, these are the people who kind of like say, you know, that the answer is technology, then let's work out the question later. And they think that, you know, they misuse the term artificial intelligence all the time and get people thinking it's robots taking our jobs, which it really isn't. And, you know, they kind of just, they default to technology as the solution. And, you know, so they're sort of, what are they, if you think they're sort of a technoptimist is a term I came across, which is not a real word.
I like
So
that though.
use it carefully. A
Yeah.
technologist, obviously they see, you know, they see good in all technology. Technology is good. It'll help, you know, drones are good and AI is good and, you know, robots, you know, cleaning the house, whatever, looking after our elderly sort of relatives is good. And then, but what there is on the other side, interestingly, is because I thought, well, if there's a technoptimist, there must be something on the other side, right? So I think it's like, if you got Luke Skywalker, what's the Darth Vader to technoptimist? And it's tech depressimist.
Oh, depressimist.
Another made up word, but it's getting a bit of traction. Depressimist, a tech depressimist.
I like that as
and if
well.
you're a tech depressimist, basically you're so pessimistic about technology, you depress anyone that you come into contact with. So the reason we're talking about those, which is a bit silly, so you've got kind of Luke Skywalker as your technoptimist, Darth Vader as your tech depressimist. And what you actually need is to be sort of like a pragmatic technoptimist, as someone who believes in technology, but in a practical way. And I kind of thought that's trying to extend my Star Wars analogy too far. That'd be Han Solo, right? Okay, so you got two positive with Luke Skywalker, two negative with Darth Vader. Then you got Han Solo. It's a bit like, you know, let's just see how it goes. So
yeah.
The point there being, you know, you have to look at this, you know, with sort of pragmatic eyes and not just thinking, you know, we can solve all our ills with technology. It has a huge role to play, but it isn't.
Yeah, of course. I think you should create that into a little cartoon or animation.
Yeah.
What is it? A techno-optimist?
Technoptimist.
Technoptimist. I like that.
I'll tell you, I think you stick it in Google, you'll get some sort of weird sites pop up saying that it's a real word, but it's not a real word.
It's not a real word. I like those words though.
They're fun. I mean, it brings across just the fact that, you know, you just need to look at things rationally and not think that you've got the answer to everything. You know, it's technology gives more tools to address some of the bigger challenges we have. It's not, you know, the silver bullet that solves everything.
No, that's fair enough then. And what route do you think, James, that most employees take, and why do they take that route?
I mean, I think employees just generally sort of follow what's gone before. You know, if there's a process in place or a system in place, you know, there's not many employees are going to stick their hand up and say, I think there's a better way, although perhaps that's changing. And, you know, you are getting people being a little bit more sort of proactive and looking at that. But I think generally sort of employees tend to go down the path that they're used to. And from a training perspective, you know, there is a certain inertia within the organization to a degree, and embracing new technology is challenging and has risk and, you know, potential cost to change from one way of doing something to another. So I think you're always going to have sort of a certain amount of inertia and resistance to new technology, and employees will often just kind of toe the line. But I think, sort of back to a previous comment, I do think their expectations are increasing. And therefore, what I think you'll find is, you know, as employees become better informed about the technology that's out there, for example, virtual reality, it's getting more profile, and, you know, with better headsets, cheaper headsets, it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. So I think people are starting to understand what it can do. So I think what you might have is, you know, an element of employees starting to say, why aren't you looking at this technology? You know, I'm training, I'm still on my, you know, my desktop at home going through stuff. Why can't I do this in VR? I think it'd be really good. So I think as they become better informed, their expectations increase. And, you know, what I'd hope there is they then sort of bring those expectations sort of back to their companies and say, hey, have you thought about this? And, you know, if companies hear it enough, it's something they need to then look at. And if they hear it enough, it gives them a sense that, you know, this isn't, you know, scary, unstable new technology, but this is actually something that's becoming more mainstream and accepted. So, you know, I think you've got the two sides there, you know, toe the party line, just keep your head down and crack on with what you're doing. And then the other side, which is expectations are increasing. Therefore, as people become better educated about technology, they expect more from their companies.
Yeah. And what would you say are the barriers to an organisation addressing these problems?
I think really at the moment it is fear of the unknown is too extreme, but it's not knowing enough about particularly virtual reality and what it can do, because it is still, you know, for many organisations a relatively new technology. For other large organisations, we work with Shell, BP, DHL. They've been doing this for years. So it's not new technology, but I think the perception with some organisations is quite new, and therefore there's a fear of that new technology. You know, there's I read a good book, or I'm reading a good book called Crossing the Chasm, which is how sort of, you know, you move through different phases of technology adoption. And the reason it's quite a challenge when you have a new technology is because people don't really have a benchmark to look at and to go, okay, well, we're replacing our content management system, or we're putting in a new VPN or whatever. People kind of, well, they get that because they've got one. When you have a really new technology, be it virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, whatever, you then get into a phase where the phrase that I thought was really useful is discontinuous innovation. So discontinuous innovation is basically where you don't really have a reference point that you can kind of go, oh, okay, well, this is an upgrade, or this is a new one. It's like, well, I don't have anything to benchmark against. And the example that was used was, you know, continuous innovation would be, you know, if you wear glasses, you buy a new pair of glasses and they're lighter or they're stronger or the lenses are better or something. That's kind of a continuous innovation. And then where also then sort of is still continuous is, well, you might try contact lenses. So it's different, but it's basically, you know, glasses without, you know, you're putting them in. So you still get it. But then if you jump to laser eye surgery, that's just like, whoa, you're gonna basically put a laser and, you know, put some incisions in my lens and solve the problem that way. It's like, oh, that's discontinuous innovation, because it's that kind of jump. And particularly, you know, virtual reality is that, because there is not like, oh yeah, we used to do it like this. It's like, well, this is just new. And therefore the challenge you have is the technology gets adopted quickly by innovators, but it doesn't get adopted by, you know, kind of the early majority, the guys where there's really going to be traction, you know. And that's the challenge, is getting from innovators through to the early majority and giving them the sense that this isn't new technology that's going to pop up and disappear, or, you know, new technology they're going to implement and then, you know, not work properly. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And from a marketing perspective, you know, what the marketing function could do there is give the proof points, you know, get the case studies out there, get existing customers talking about what they've done. And, you know, and then suddenly the early majority are like, oh, okay, well, if Shell are using it, wow, it's, you know, they're not going to just be going out on a whim and using technology that is unstable. They've obviously had a look at it. So you then give that, you know, early majority the sense that they're not getting in over their heads, and they're not going to,
Yeah.
suddenly catch a cold and really be cause problems to their organisation by using the technology.
Yeah, I guess it's confidence, isn't it? Kind of confidence in trying something new. And that's a great analogy, like with the laser eyes, because it's so
Yeah,
true. I've got
yeah,
friends that have had the laser eye that was so stickler for their contact lenses, and I can't go to laser. Oh
yeah,
gosh, now they've had it done, they see life so differently.
yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Such a great
Another good
analogy.
example is 3D TV. So obviously, we had TVs back in the day before sort
Yeah,
of, high definition. You went to high definition, and then in between there, you got the 3D TV, which is an analogy I hear used a lot about new technology, and it really didn't work very well. So but that was a discontinuous type innovation as well.
yeah. Well, I always used to think like virtual reality was like, like on the headsets with the gamers, and
Yeah,
kind of that's my not,
yeah,
it's only recently I've done a few little projects where they've used virtual reality, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know you could do this. I didn't, and
yeah.
the impact it had.
I mean, it's still huge. Its biggest market is still gaming currently. Enterprise is catching up, but yeah, I mean, it started, within the gaming sphere, and all the amazing games you've got out there at the moment,
I
like Super
know.
Hot and Beat Saber, which is the most famous one. Yeah, I mean, it started from gaming.
Yeah,
PlayStation, came out with their version quite some time ago, about the same time as Oculus came out with theirs. And those I think that's still the biggest selling headset is obviously is for gaming. So, but if you look at what you can do in gaming, you can be in a completely different world and
yeah,
interacting, picking things up and doing whatever. Well, why not, instead of it being, running around a medieval castle killing trolls, why not that be putting someone, in a medical environment where they're having to interact with the equipment and the
yeah,
patient. So it's quite a natural progression from the level of immersion you get when gaming.
yeah,
Why can't you use that for creating scenarios that are either impossible to create in the real world because they're there's something like a fire or something, or
yeah.
expensive to create. So it's quite a natural evolution from the gaming environment through to simulation for training.
And you've sort of answered the next thing I was kind of going to bring up are what are the benefits from addressing it? I guess, like you say, you can create things that would be costly. What other benefits are there from using
The
it?
biggest benefit really is the level of focus that people have when they're in VR. If you think about it, if you're taking, say, you're taking some sort of fire training, and you do it on a laptop and you're looking at videos and you're clicking through PowerPoints, it's pretty boring. You're probably looking
Mm.
around, your colleague comes and offers you a tea if you're not working remotely. If you're working remotely, maybe it's your partner comes and offers you a tea, which would be nice. But you're instantly distracted. If you put a VR headset on and you're completely focused on what you're looking at, so your level of focus is pretty much 100% because you don't have a choice. So what that does is that aids ultimately means by being more focused, you're retaining more of the information. And there are studies that show it's anywhere up to 75% retention compared to, say, watching a video. And so you're retaining that information, which is absolutely key. But it's that level of focus, the level of immersion, and by retaining that information for longer, what that pushes out is an instant business benefit of, well, if someone remembers the information longer, I don't have to train them as often. So if you're training
Mm.
someone 3 times a year currently, if you push that into VR in the right way, and they only then need to be trained twice a year, well, you've saved a third of your training costs. So
Yeah,
that's an obvious one, but you're just completely focused. You don't have an opportunity to be distracted. Okay, you can't be in there ideally much more than sort of 20, 30 minutes, but you can do a lot in 20 or 30 minutes to do that. So that's probably, the biggest benefit of it. And there's various other benefits whereby, if you're bringing people, if you're using VR and you can send out headsets to X number of people, they aren't having to travel, which of course in this day and age is really important. They aren't having to travel
yeah,
to a central, training facility. And even forget the lockdown, outside of lockdown, well, you're still saving cost and, arguably there's an environmental benefit as well because there's less travel. So there's those things, and there's kind of always the sort of payoff between better efficiency and sort of cost savings, and you can do both by using VR. But I think ultimately where it comes out is it is better training because people are better at what they do because they're able to retain that information for longer. Therefore, they're better at their jobs. They enjoy their jobs more because they're better at their jobs. So better retention. There's all these sorts of things that play into it.
And like you say, obviously the time that we're in now, obviously with people still working from home, it's a great tool, because really people sitting at home doing training courses, going through PowerPoints, are they going to be motivated? Are they actually going to sit there? And do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no problem. And I think we've probably all done it. You just skip through as quick as you can. And, get to you can get a chance to repeat it. You go through really fast, and then you kind of learn the answers, which is no good. But I mean, whereas if nowadays with headsets coming down in price, you can get an Oculus Quest for £400. You could send that out to, even if you send it out to, 100 people, okay, it's £40,000, but they get to keep that piece of equipment for as long as they need it. And, you can train that person remotely. They can do it at home. They can take the training whenever they want. And how we've got it set up Immerse is that we have a platform that means all that can be tracked as well. So you can see when someone logs in, you can see what they've done, you can see what score, if there's a score, or whether they passed the training. So all these sorts of things. So it sort of devolves the control, meaning that employees can take that training whenever they're ready. They can know that they're getting their scores logged, and it can go towards their overall training program. It can integrate with a learning management system where all the information is kept. So yeah, I mean, it does make sense. It made sense pre-lockdown. It makes a little bit more sense now. But once things settle down, I think a lot of organisations will have a keener interest to look at exactly what's going on.
Brilliant. I don't know if it's my signal. Hang on one sec, James. It's just buffering a minute. That's better.
Yeah, I've switched on to a different Wi-Fi, so that might be better.
That's it. Okay, fantastic. Well, I was just going to say, what would the next steps be then for sort of companies, organisations that are thinking of VR to kind of take? What would be the next going forward?
I mean, it's really important for companies as they consider any new technology to think, well, how do I prove the value of this to the business? How do I show that this actually is doing all the things that I claim it does, better retention, reduction in costs, whatever. So the way that a lot of organizations move into this kind of, when they're looking at new technologies, is to run a proof of concept. So trying to do something that is, the minimum viable product. So save your budget for when it's successful and you want to roll it out. Just do what is needed to do in order to either, get the okay from, senior stakeholders, or to, get employees on board. So give them a demo of it so they feel it's good. So, the way for organizations to look at it is to run a proof of concept, not spend a great deal of money on that just because you want to get to a point where you're showing the value for it. And then once you get to that point, and you get the buy-in, you then move into a pilot where you can actually start getting some proper data back for it. So maybe you try it in 10 locations, or you send it out to 100 employees, and then you actually start measuring what's coming back. And then if that is ticking the right boxes from a sort of KPI perspective, you then look at a full rollout. So it's kind of much as with any sort of new initiative, it makes sense to dip a toe into the water, see if it's the right temperature. If it's the right temperature, then start getting ready to actually sort of dive in. So that's a good way to approach new technology without sort of exposing yourself to a lot of risk or committing to a lot of budget. And that's how we tend to work with a lot of our customers have started POC and then move into sort of bigger pilots and rollouts.
And what sort of timeframes do you look at for that, like with a pilot, like running a pilot for it? How long?
I mean, it very much depends on what the training is, but you can have a proof of concept up and running. You can have that up and running depending on how much time is available from the customer's perspective, and that you're not waiting on sign-offs and what have you. But you can get something very substantial up and running in 3 months. A pilot, it then just depends on how much sort of data you want to get back through the pilot process. So the pilot process, with some of our customers, we've run those for sort of 6, 8, even 12 months as a pilot. For others, it can be much shorter, whereby they just want to get the initial data set and then go from there. So, but I mean, to sort of really scale from, not using VR for training to sort of having some sort of meaningful program, you're probably looking there from start to finish and having something rolled out. I think the quickest you could probably do that would be, I'd say, would probably be 8 months, maybe a bit less if you're really efficient. But I think also sort of anywhere up to 12 months to get something sort of properly bought in by the business and rolled out across a business. And once again, depending on how large the organisation is, Shell is 80 odd thousand employees. DHL is 130,000, I think. So depending on how big the organisations are.
Yeah. And what would you say that an organisation should be prepared for in their journey with kind of trialling VR, piloting it?
I think, because it is that discontinuous innovation that I mentioned previously, it's making sure that you are bringing people along with you as you go through the process. So making sure the stakeholders are all on board, making sure there's regular interaction with them, regular interaction with the employees, because they don't, as I said, they don't have that reference point of, oh, okay, this is an improvement on X, or this is a new version of that. They don't have that that reference. And so therefore, really what you have to do is you have to make sure that they are bought into the process and engaged in that process, which takes a lot of management, not only on the supplier side for our side, but also on the customer's side as well. They have to have the right level of resource involved in it. And so it's really important to make sure you're doing that and moving it through the process. And I think also, there's a challenge to make sure you're not just replicating what's gone before. If you're just taking what you had before and sticking it in VR, you've kind of missed the point. You need to make sure that you're taking the right things. If you had a PowerPoint presentation or something, and then you go into VR and you sit people in a classroom and they're looking at PowerPoint, but it's got a bit of interactivity, well, that's pointless. Whatever you have on that PowerPoint, if it's showing, a certain scene, put that person in the scene. Don't show them the scene. They can be in the scene. So I think the challenge can be, once again, because there isn't that reference point, it's like, okay, we'll take what we've done and we'll kind of put it into VR. So it's sort of interactive, but actually you're not really rethinking the process completely. If you're training someone on a process, put them in that scenario. And if it's something risky, well, that doesn't matter because there's no risk to them, but you can still have something break right next to them and, pipe fracture or whatever it is. But you can do that. Don't sort of put them in an environment and show them a picture of a fractured pipe.
No.
So the challenge some organizations is understanding how to use it in the right way. And that's all about user experience and making sure that you're building that training so that it's fit for purpose and has the right experience for that trainee, which is, no different to any other experience they would have. It's just that within a virtual environment, you can do anything and you don't want to just, overwhelm the trainee with too much, everything sort of crumbling or exploding or doing whatever. You want to just make sure it's the right focus for them and they're getting out of it the right thing for them.
So do you use actors and kind of, how does it work then from kind of?
It's all computer generated. So, you'll have an avatar, you'll have an avatar which will basically it won't look human at the moment because they're not at that level of ability to replicate a human being, but it's someone, so you'll tell they're an avatar. Some are better than others, but what a lot of our training is, you can be in there with multiple people and you'll just kind of see it's like a representation of a head. It's sort of a blue or a yellow, or it just, you'll see it's a representation. We're not trying to make them look human because it does then tend to look a bit, odd and puts people off. So if they're clear that it is just like a representation, that's fine. And so the whole environment is computer generated. We use a 3D gaming engine called Unity, and you can create whatever you want. So it's the great thing is you can create any scenario you want. It's just a question of how much effort you want to put into the level of quality of that environment, and therefore how much budget you have. But you can create anything, and you can have it looking absolutely beautiful and realistic, and perfect glimmering metal surfaces, or the sun bouncing off the ocean, or you can just have that as a flat surface, because all you need someone to do is pick something up, turn a dial, put it over there, measure the reading, and then move on. And do you need that to look beautiful? No, you need them to understand the process they get to. So it's you'll see some virtual reality content out there that is absolutely breathtaking, and you'll see virtual reality content out there that is looks fine, but it's not perfect, because it doesn't need to be perfect.
No, just to serve the kind of purpose for what a company needs.
Exactly.
And what would you say is the unexpected value that an organisation gets from VR training?
Unexpected value. I think there's the tangible value they'll get. So there will be efficiencies, there will be cost savings, there are all those sort of pieces. But then I think there's kind of a more unexpected one, which will be that employee engagement piece that I mentioned before, which is the slightly intangible. So an employee thinking of the company as an innovative company, and therefore perhaps being prouder to be part of that company, because this company is looking at cutting edge technology. So I think that's definitely sort of something that is less tangible. But that whole expectation piece that I mentioned previously, and employees expecting their companies to invest in them and to be looking at the latest technology, that I think is just becoming more and more important. So ultimately, where I'd say is embracing newer technology like virtual reality is sort of giving you that employee engagement, which is quite a sort of hot topic at the moment, and therefore all the benefits that come across from that, which is productivity, loyalty, advocacy, all those sorts of things.
Brilliant. Well, that sort of brings us to the end, James. Thank you so much for. Well, it's been brilliant talking to you. Is there anything else you want to kind of say or mention about VR?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I like to mention is, as part of what the world has been through and is still going through with this pandemic, you do hear people talk a lot about technology being the answer, and particularly VR, because obviously people aren't able to travel so much. And I agree there is a role to play. I don't think it has completely transformed what the technology can do. And so my view is that I hope that as companies go through the process, and I think at the moment they're still pretty much in crisis management, there's still kind of, let's keep the lights on, let's keep things going. But I like to think that in 4-6 months, as things hopefully continue to settle, I know there's some questions around that will continue, but if things continue to settle, what I really hope is one of the few positives to come out of this horrendous situation is that companies look at technology differently. It's been a mass forced experiment, which the skeptics who said, no, we can't do all this over video conferencing, or we can't use technology to enhance how we work. Hopefully those people have now seen that it does work. And therefore, if as they move into more of a consolidation phase, I would hope that the senior leaders within organizations will be like, okay, we do need to take technology and new ways of working more seriously, because we know that they can work. It's not to say they're all going to work. No. But I really hope a small positive is that a more openness to technology as a whole, and what it can do for businesses. But we'll have to see how that plays out over the next 6 months or so.
Months. I mean, it's even as silly things like me with Zoom. I knew Zoom existed before this whole pandemic, But if you'd said to me, use Zoom, Emily, to communicate or to interview, so I'd be like, oh no, I wouldn't use Zoom.
Yeah,
Now it's become my best friend. Like I literally am on it most days,
yeah.
3, 4, 5 times a day.
It works. It works. I mean, it's not the same as meeting in
Of
person,
course
but
it's not.
it's pretty good. And so,
Exactly.
so that person, the example I use is a guy who I heard about who used to fly over to New York for like a 2-hour meeting every other week, and because it had to be face to face, just had to be go shake the hand, go whatever. And obviously he hasn't been able to do that. And guess what? The relationship is still just as strong.
Yeah.
And instead of it taking 2 days, almost 2 days out of his calendar, it's now taking 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I think it's those examples where people are like, oh, okay, maybe I only need to fly over once every 6 months.
Yeah.
I'll do the
It,
Zoom. I'll do it over Zoom or whatever else you're going to use. So yeah, I think it's hopefully it's open